No picky eater will starve. I can't tell you how frustrating that is for me to hear other health professionals say that to clients, to parents, to other folks in the hospital, other people on the team. Well, let me tell you where that belief came from. I'm going to show you something. I'm trying to hold it up to the camera here for you. This is one of my favorite magnets. Let me go over here. There you go. It's by Ann Tainter, and it says, "What am I making for supper? Why, sweetie, I'm making whatever the hell I want, served with a side of eat it or starve." Well, you know what? If you take a look at this magnet, this is back in the day when I was a little kid, when we didn't have a lot of eating disorders and we didn't have a lot of food allergies, and we certainly didn't know a lot about sensory processing. And family lifestyle was very different than it is today. And dinner was served on a regular basis in my house every night at 6 p.m. And there were just so many other factors. And so when professionals and psychologists and people who were giving parenting advice like Dr. Spock would say things like, no kid will starve, they were talking about typically developing kids. And what they meant by that was, relax, it's okay. They'll have something to eat in a few hours at the next meal or the next snack. They're not going to starve. They meant it in a lighthearted way. Well, somehow that information, that lighthearted saying has turned into a scientific fact, apparently. And I say that with sarcasm. That quote typically we're talking about kids who don't have a feeding disorder, kids who don't have extreme, restricted, picky eating habits. We're not talking about the garden variety picky eater, which certainly are kids that I love to work with, but those kids are ready for the division of responsibility, where it's the parent's job to put the healthy food in front of the child. And if the child doesn't eat it, it's okay. There's more food coming. But I also work with kids who have true feeding disorders. Now, I'm not saying that the picky eaters don't have feeding difficulties, but they're not yet diagnosed with feeding disorder. And the difference there is that these kids have really limited the amount of food that they will eat or the variety of food that they will eat for either medical, sensory, motor, or extreme learned behaviors because something disturbed their relationship with food. So that's a whole nother topic we can talk about another time. But when we're really focusing on this idea that no kid will starve, and we were just talking about typically developing children. Well, did you know that research shows that 25% of typically developing children will develop a feeding disorder? So we're talking about those kids, and that's a quarter of the population when you think about that fact, of young children who had trouble eating and never really grew out of it for whatever reason it might be. Those kids over time will starve. And what I mean by that is they're not going to starve because they didn't eat between lunch and dinner. They're not going to starve because they didn't eat a good dinner and they're going to be really hungry in the morning. Starving is slowly over time. And that's how kids go from being where their pediatrician and their family are concerned about their weight to being diagnosed as underweight to being diagnosed as failure to thrive, which is a pretty serious condition to have. Those kids are slowly losing weight because they're not taking in adequate calories and or nutrition. I know those kids all too well. They would rather not eat because eating is hard. Eating is hard for them. And hunger certainly plays a key. We're going to talk about that in a second. But not enough that if you just let them get hungry enough, which seems to be the popular advice, that they'll go ahead and eat. That simply isn't true. And if they do go ahead and eat, believe me, they won't love the experience and they won't love the food. They won't love the experience and they won't love the food. And feeding therapy is helping these kids learn to love food, not just learning how to eat. You know, extreme hunger too, it only makes our anxiety go up. And when our anxiety goes up, our cortisol levels go up and we lose our appetite and everything becomes a vicious cycle. But let's talk about hunger for a second. All righty. So I want to make sure that all of you understand something about this chat today, is that funny enough, in Raising a Healthy Happy Eater, the book that I wrote with Dr. Namali Fernando, a pediatrician in Virginia, we call her Dr. Yum, this quote that I was just telling you about, that I'm serving with a side of Eat It or Starve, is actually the very first sentence in our book. And that's because we use that quote to get this conversation going. When we're talking about hunger, in Raising a Healthy Happy Eater, we say that hunger is the secret sauce. And I mean a little bit of sauce, a little bit of hunger, not the whole bottle, okay? In other words, yeah, we want kids to be on a regular snack and mealtime schedule for sure, with about 2 to 2.5 hours in between those snacks and meals so they can really get a little bit of hunger going. Hunger is there for a reason. It's there to show us that we need to fuel our body, that we need to nourish our body. That's the important thing. We want kids to feel it. So definitely, we don't want kids to graze all day. We want a little bit of hunger. And yeah, if they don't eat everything, we don't want to add pressure and make them eat. But we certainly want to set them up for success. A little bit of hunger means that they're more likely to try a new food, but it doesn't guarantee it. So that's why we stress that when you offer kids on a regular mealtime schedule their preferred food, that you also include a little bit of new or non or semi-preferred foods to continue to provide those exposures to help them learn to love food. I want you to think about it this way, and then I'm going to start looking at questions. So go ahead and start typing in your questions, and we'll answer those in just a second. I want you to think about that if you didn't have the skill to swim, you're not going to learn by me throwing you in the deep end. You know, maybe, yeah, exactly. You're not going to learn. I like it when people are like, yeah, that's true. Feeding therapy helps kids learn the skill of tasting, chewing, and swallowing new foods. But as I said earlier, just as importantly, it teaches kids to love all kinds of foods. So if I threw you in the deep end and I had the attitude of, you know how to swim a little bit, you'll probably make it to the other side. No kid will drown. Well, first of all, we better start saying a prayer that you do make it to the other side. But even if you paddle your little heart out and you're sputtering and you make it and grab onto the other side, I guarantee you, you will hate swimming. You will be scared to death of swimming. Swimming will not be a good experience, and it will take many, many more opportunities that are positive, that build confidence, that build skill in that pool before you'll finally give up on the idea that swimming is really scary. And that's what it's like for kids who have extreme feeding issues. Not only is it scary, but they don't have the skill yet. So yeah, they will starve. So what I'd love for you to do is share this thought, share this conversation with other healthcare professionals. Get the conversation going. Talk to pediatricians, talk to nurse practitioners, talk to anyone on the feeding team. Chat about this. Let's dispel this myth that, no kid will starve. Because I know there are plenty of you watching right now who are all professionals who know that that's not true. And for the parents who are watching right now, it breaks my heart that they have to hear that from another health professional.